Welcome to the Boundless Bible. My name is David Shapiro.
Hey, I'm Javi Marquez.
And I'm Jason Holloway.
Hello, everybody.
Hey.
Hi.
So today's episode actually comes from my daughter's question. The other day, her and I were doing some Bible study. We were reading the Bible together, and she just mentioned to me that this had to do with fish. She's like, hey, they keep mentioning fish in the Bible. I said, man, there really is a lot of consistency with what God uses in the Bible.
Yeah.
Things like rocks or stones, water, fish, wisdom, judgment, love, exile.
Yeah.
There's just repeated things. And Jason, you've said it as well.
Yeah.
It just seems like, especially in the Old Testament, it is, hey, we're doing good. We have our land back, and oops, we messed up. We're exiled. And again and again and again.
I love, oops, we're exiled.
That's it. There is some definite consistency in the Bible.
Yeah.
I just want to open up the conversation and, first start off with, why is consistency important? Why do we think that God is being consistent throughout the Bible?
Ooh, that's good. I think that's his nature. I think he has no other way but to be consistent. And when I think about consistency, or I think about God and being inconsistent, I think it devalues the word God, or it devalues him. So I think him being consistent is something that we could lean on. We could always trust. We could always put our foot forward in. I love the fact that we're talking about this, because a God that's inconsistent, it would be scary.
It's an oxymoron, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so
It could be.
I mean, yeah, right. So yeah. I think that the reason is, I said this kind of recently, is that the reason that God is consistent in the Bible anyway is because that's how we can read into the nature of God, right? That at no point does the Bible say, here, I'm going to tell you, here, so come sit down. I'm going to tell you about God and all the stories of God, right? It's not how it works. It's the whole Old Testament is really just a story of the teaching us about the nature of God, the nature of humans, and the nature of the relationships of God with humans. And, you can do that through consistency. So every time a human does this, X consequence comes. Every time a human does this, Y consequence comes. So the consistency is a way for us to learn by virtue of the same ways that we learn. If you touch fire, you get burned. If you walk without paying attention where you're going, you're going to fall down, things like that. So I think that's the first point of consistency there. The other thing I would say is that you mentioned, Javi, that the idea of a God being inconsistent is a really uncomfortable one. And I think a lot like, we talk about God our Father, right? And a father or mother or parental figure who is inconsistent is one you can't trust.
And that's what I'm like
exactly
comparing it to, almost like us being so human as many times we're inconsistent, and that could be frustrating sometimes. Especially when you're expecting something, right? Expectancy is tough too.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's the thing about consistency.
I think that, when you look at consistency, I mean, there's a couple of things it does right off the bat. One is it's vital for trust, which both of you just hit. It's absolutely vital for trust. You can't trust somebody who's inconsistent. Another one is it fosters momentum. I think that, when you have the understanding of how something is going to work, you start to build momentum on that. And one of the things I look at is, the story of the Exodus, where, we always look at the Israelites who are grumbling, and they've just seen all these miracles and they're grumbling. One of the things you have to remember is, they were in captivity for 400 years. They don't understand who this God is, how this God works. So as he's working, they're new and they're going, I don't understand how is this safe? How is this right? How is this? And little by little, he is pushing them a little bit further to go, you have to trust me. You have to trust me.
Right.
And he's doing things consistently by protecting them, whether it's parting the Red Sea, whether it's making water from a rock, whether it's manna. He is continuously providing for them while giving them a little bit. He hasn't given them the full law yet. It's not, hey, you have to do this because I've built all this trust.
But but he is consistent in the punishment when they don't turn towards him. So again, consistency is, I mentioned the parent thing before, but any parent or even a child who had a parent knows that consistency is how you learn. If right now it's okay for me to drive my bike off the street and tomorrow it's not, and tomorrow it is, and tomorrow it's not, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I don't know what's right. I don't know what's wrong. Yeah. So especially in the beginning of the Bible, when God has these nascent humans, these very still young societies, his consistency is how they got to learn what was right and what was wrong, what has positive consequence, what has negative consequence. And so I think that's just really fascinating.
It is. And also when we think of humans, one of the things I always think of, God created us, in his image. And when we look at him being consistent, we say, okay, he's consistent in all these things. Humans are also consistent. And we always get the bad rap. Hey, we're consistent in sin and we're consistent in messing up. But consistency also builds teamwork.
Yeah.
The more you have consistency from people around you, the better team you have.
For sure.
And I think that's one thing where we go as a positive way as humans. The more we're consistent like God is, the more we can start trusting people, having fellowship with people. I think that's really important. I think that God, put that in us as well to be consistent for each other, to work better together, for us to have teamwork and camaraderie.
Yeah, I mean, trust is so key and it's probably the key word of all of this. Like, if I had to even boil it down, even at this very moment, to like, what is this all about? It's about trust. We can trust in God because we know that if we act in a certain way, we're going to have a certain response. If we act in another way, we're going to have a certain response. And so it gives us a clarity of when we're making decisions, good ones or bad ones. We know where we're standing. We know where we're coming at. We know what angle we're approaching it from, and we know that we can trust that there will be good or there will be wrath that comes from that. And that's how else would we live our lives if we didn't have that?
That's a good statement. Yeah. It's a good example, right? Jesus Christ is another example. Like the way he lived his life, the way he acted upon with the apostles, and just kind of how he loved many, and how he stopped to do his mission to love others and give back, and just kind of, obviously do miracles. We could learn from that. That's a good example for us. And he was consistent in that in many ways.
And we should be more consistent too. Again, we're made in God's image, right? And we are consistently faulty, but we should be working towards being more consistently godly, right? And we need to be consistent with our actions. We need to be consistent with our words. We need to be consistent with our treatment of others. I mean, granted, we're not going to be. We are sinners. We know that, but we should try. And God's the first great example of that.
I'm glad you said that, because what I was thinking about when I think about consistency, and you're saying that we need to be that way, God calls us to be like him in his image, calls us to be righteous, be good, to be loving, to be holy, just like he is. Yeah. And I think we're able to do that here on earth with our bodies, to be that way. And I think when we do that, we find joy in that, we find peace, but a lot of times we're inconsistent with that.
Yeah, totally.
And when we're inconsistent, and I'm trying to flesh this out, when I was thinking about this, it was God is consistent, and he wants us to be that way, but we would never reach that. We're flawed. We're finite, and he shows us that, and we can never reach that. And I think that's why we need him. I see what you're saying. You get what I'm trying to get at?
We need him. He needs to be the goalpost so that we have something to aim for. Right. Not that we'll get there, but I mean, I think I said this on a previous episode. The thing about we've always heard that we're sinners, and so we fall short of the glory of God. But like, that's kind of Christianese for, you know what I mean? It's like, and after years of hearing it, you stop realizing what it means. And what it means is like, we are human, which means we are pulled by the flesh to do certain fleshly things. And our spirit knows the good. Our spirit knows the kindness and the joy of helping. And our spirits are good and clean.
Yeah.
But our bodies pull us in the opposite direction. And so God is our constant reminder, our consistent reminder of what we should be, and that it is probable, and it is possible, and it is within shooting, direction, if not, achievement, but it's within shooting direction to get there.
Yeah.
But if we don't have him, we don't have anything to shoot for.
I'll tell you about consistency. One thing I see with people is we are very easy to be consistent on those things that are core characteristics of who we are.
Yeah.
So when you have, a husband and a wife, and they are, arguing, it's usually because one is consistent with something, and then the other person says, hey, I want you to be consistent about this. And they go, okay, but they never get there. Why? Because that's not part of their core characteristic. Right. I think when you look at the Bible, you have God who is showing consistencies, but in his core characteristic. And I'm just going to bring up a couple of them. And listen, he is consistent about a lot of things. So don't rip me apart if I missed something.
Yeah, sure.
But some of his core characteristics are, God's influence and miracles that we know he does. That is the meaning of fish. A fish symbolizes miracles and God's influence. Which is, again, something that he's consistent in his characteristic.
I just thought it means like infinity or something like that.
It's the symbol that we use, again, God's influence. Water represents God's power, symbolizes life, renewal. So that's again the water. You have wisdom, which is the illuminated path in life. Again, we've talked about wisdom and knowledge and what the difference are.
Yeah.
Rock and stone, which is God's unchanging ways, which is exactly what consistency is. And then you have judgment, love.
We have light. Light is always purity, right?
There we go.
Light is always purity and perfection.
Yep. These are literally his characteristics. So when he's consistent, the comfort we get is he's consistent in who he is and his core and characteristic. We know who he is. And that's part of being faithful to God, is not just knowing there is a God, but knowing God.
Right.
And I think with us,
that's wrong.
Saying, hey, we want to be consistent like him. We have characteristics, core. Every one of us has something core differently inside of us that we're consistent with. The trouble goes when we try to be consistent with something that doesn't mean anything to our lives. And then how do you do that? You're just forcing it. It's gonna.
Are you talking about like bad habits or like addictions?
That's what I'm thinking. I mean, I'm thinking. I think that's the point.
I didn't think about that in the opposite of as far as thinking about inconsistency,
right?
Or inconsistent in a negative way.
Yeah, consistency in a negative way, right?
Wow,
we consistently are faulty. We are consistently choosing our dopamine rushes for this moment over long-term real happiness and real satisfaction. We are constantly choosing the pizza over the salad. It's stuff like that. Like we are consistent in those things.
Leave me alone, man.
We're constantly doing those things, and I think that is going back to what I said a minute ago about us being one half spirit, one half human. Is like we need God in our lives to be the consistent goalpost, to be the constant picture of perfection, not because we're ever going to achieve it, but because we should be trying to achieve it.
What I wanted to say was like in the path to seeking consistency and the path to taking on God's attributes and of being holy and being consistent and being righteous. And if we were to achieve that, which we won't, but if we were to achieve that, how big would our head go? How much of a God that we would think we are? I
mean, look at Pharaoh, look at Caesar.
And,
that's kind of what that's all about.
I'm
right?
like, wait a minute. If we were to be just consistent as God,
our consistency would be the wrong kind of consistency. In fact, look, that's Sodom and Gomorrah, right? At that time, they weren't looking at God and they were being consistent, but they were being consistently fleshly. They were being consistently drawn to what gave them an instant satisfaction of goodness in that moment. Although that wasn't, perpetual goodness that they could even reach, but that's what that was. I mean, we are consistent. I mean, the question is, what are you going to be consistent with in your life?
See, that consistency to me, it's, I say this is lack of a better word, it's easy.
Oh, yeah.
When doing the other thing of what God calls us to be, that could be hard because that requires to
discipline.
Die of ourselves.
And discipline.
Yeah. Sacrificing what we feel for someone else. Oh, that's hard.
Oh, totally.
Or do we use it? I mean, here's one of those things when we're talking about consistency of who we are as humans. And sometimes we have consistency for bad things. We go, okay, addiction to gambling, addiction to alcohol or substance abuse and things like that. We go, okay, that's not a great thing to be consistent with. But if we were able to flip that and say the core value in my life is addiction, and I can flip that and go, I'm not going to be addicted to the drugs or the alcohol or the gambling, but I'm going to be addicted to God's word. I'm going to be addicted. I mean, again, you are now utilizing that.
How powerful is that? The characteristic of being obsessive, or the characteristic of being devoted, or the characteristic of what you're saying now. It's like if your core characteristic is to yearn and to seek and to try and find, just change the core value. Don't change the core value. Change what it is that you're seeking and trying to find.
Yes, 100%.
Wow, yeah, that's a good one.
Yes.
I wanted to mention some verses that brings me peace when I think about God's consistency. And the first one always is Hebrews 13:8 that says Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And that's truth, because I feel like when you look at Psalms 119:89, it goes into saying, your word, Lord, is eternal. It stands firm in the heavens. Your faithfulness continues through all generations. You establish the earth and it endures. Your laws endures to this day, for all things serve you. And that brings me peace to know that we have a God that's consistent. And there's many other scriptures in the Bible that talks about God's consistency.
But that's it. Instantly, you get comforted. You go, I feel comfort from those verses. to know that God is consistent, to know that he's the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, I can hold that, in my heart and go, I know that God is going to be this way tomorrow. I don't have to guess. What you were saying, Jason, when you have a parent who is one day, one way, and then one way another day, as a child, it's a horrible way to grow up.
That's neuroticism. I mean, that is literally like the textbook definition of what makes a person neurotic is not knowing what's coming after, what the result is going to be of any given action. And that makes them very, very neurotic. I would even go as far as to say, when it comes to the consistency thing, is like that trust value is so important. And even in my own life, I told the story a couple times recently, is like, even when I was an atheist, if I really search my soul and kind of remember all the details moving backwards, even when I was at my most like disbelieving, unbelieving, denying, if something really bad happened in my life, I still trusted God so deeply somewhere that I would still go, and put my hands.
I'm right there with you, bro.
I'd put my hands together and I would go, I know I haven't talked to you. I know I don't deserve this.
Yeah.
I know for a fact that I shouldn't be coming to you right now, but I have nowhere else to go. Wow. And if you're there, I need you.
That's good.
And bro, to think about that in reverse. I can relate. Yeah. To think about that in reverse is so weird, to think that my body would have acknowledged it so deeply that I still trusted, even though I was living an entire life anti.
And that's the consistency that we're talking about here, right? His love, his comfort that he's going to be here, his peace that he brings, the joy that he brings. That's the consistency we talk about when we think about God. At least for me, it's wow. We got this God that could really take away our burdens, our hurt, our discomfort. He brings this goodness, and to know that he's consistent in that. Oh man, I could lean on that all day.
Well, think about the amount of times anybody who's old enough to have tried to do something and felt very strongly that they were capable alone, only to come to the end of a road and realize that they weren't enough, and that that you can't do it yourself. That there is a limit to your capability.
Ooh,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
When anybody who's felt that moment also realizes the need for that consistency of someone else to be there in those times of need. And I think anybody listening to this who's had that moment and been in that place should stop and go, what exactly is it inside me that knew that? And how was that just kind of built in?
It's just one of the ways that God created us. And he just created with exactly with the image of who he is.
Yeah.
And I like to always flip it, and we were just telling the story of when you were at your most unbelieving, how you were still feeling that connection. I just think about God in that moment, who is celebrating, not angry at you, who's celebrating and saying, "Thank you for coming back. Thank you for looking up instead of looking inward."
I have the same vision of him every time I have this memory. That's it, right there.
He had his arm crossed.
He had his arms crossed. He was smirking at me, and he was like, "For real?
Really?
Yeah.
No.
But it wasn't. No, but it wasn't a bad smirk. It was like a, come on, do it.
There we go. Okay,
you're here. Come on, say it. Like but I have this vision of him smirking at me, being like, "I knew you'd come back." But it's just hysterical every time I see it. Let's change topics for a minute, because I think the other interesting thing about consistency isn't the nature of God, although that's fascinating.
Yeah,
it's how the Bible writes in consistent patterns, because the patterns are meant to tell you things. You mentioned before, water.
Yes.
And water has a few different meanings, actually.
It does.
Water has the cleansing part, and the
it does. It has a destruction part to it.
It has a destruction part,
life and destruction,
but
and
it also
God's
has
power.
It also has confusion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like water is also confusion,
Yep.
but
it's
so
purity. It's
and if when you learn like these 2, 3, 4 motifs, all of a sudden we're talking about the boundless Bible here. This is when the Bible goes whoomp, and it just opens up into like 100,000 more layers. The wilderness.
Yeah.
The wilderness, the consistency of using the wilderness as the place of being lost, the place of not knowing where to go, the place of needing to have some struggle in your life to figure out
Yes,
It's a testing ground. It's all this stuff. When you get into the consistency of light, look, the burning bush may be fire, but it's also light. It's a light that, look, a burning bush isn't that exciting in the daytime. I mean, it is, but it's way more exciting in the nighttime, right?
Yeah.
Because it's drawing you in, and that light is that purity, and there's things like that.
Yeah. There's light in the darkness, right? Yeah.
There's so many of these things that are so fascinating to me, and like let's not even get into numerology. The use of 7 in the Hebrew as being the perfection.
Yes.
Which, by the way, was super weird. The other day I realized that the 5 loaves and 2, what is it? 5 loaves
Two
and
fish.
2 fish
Mhm.
is 7.
Yep.
And then there's another story of 4 loaves and 3 fish,
Yep.
7.
Oh, wow.
Like seeing what I'm like, noticing these little details all
Yeah.
over. There's the 40. At 40 is always, another number that comes up, whether it's the 40 days in the wilderness, whether it's 40 days of fasting. 40 happens to happen a lot in the testing trial phases, right?
Yep. There's definitely a lot of consistency in numerology and in the Bible in general.
Totally.
Yeah.
I think when you start to look through it, you'll start to see, listen, there are people who go as far as really looking at like every couple of words, pulling the word out and saying,
Yeah.
hey, this is what this says. And whether or not those are meant to be there and hidden or just, happenstance and they happen to be there. There are some brilliant things that are written down. Even the consistency of books pointing to one another. When you start looking at, and Javi, you mentioned this to me the other day.
Yeah.
When you start looking at the Bible and you go, okay, this is written by so many authors in so many different continents through so many years.
Yeah.
And we take that for granted. We go, okay, so a lot of people wrote it, big deal.
Yeah. Well,
But when you start to see the tie-ins, and there's this really, really great diagram that people have put together that shows you this rainbow of colors of these arches connecting the different stories together.
I've seen that. That's awesome. Yeah.
I mean, talk about consistency.
Yeah, I think it's 60,000 like connections or something like that.
Wow.
Yeah, it is unbelievable. And again, Javi mentioned this the other day to me, and it is, when you start to look at that diagram, you go, this is a consistent God who's writing a consistent word. And it is just beautiful.
Yeah, I mean,
up and down.
but
Unwavering.
even the
Unwavering.
even the stories, like, you have Moses who gets the Red Sea crossed in front of him, and then right before they go into the Promised Land, Joshua crosses over a river. Like there's so many like little details like that, and like I find it so fascinating to look at the consistency even between stories. Like that's one of them.
Okay.
Jonah being gone in the whale for 3 days. Jesus
He's been in the tomb for 3 days.
goes in the tomb for 3 days. Like there's all these like motifs that show up throughout the story. And again, obviously it's not an accident, right? That's not an accident, no matter which way you look at it. And it begs the question of, what are you making me look at? What else are you hiding in plain sight? What else is being alluded to that I need to draw the correlation between? It's almost like a chiasm. I think we've talked about chiasm before, but like there's these different literary techniques that the writers of the Bible have employed in order to physically force your brain, if you're paying enough attention, to look at something specific. And it's just, that's the stuff that just blows my mind.
I wanted to also bring up, the consistency in the actual Bible, the writing of it, right?
Yeah. No, there's definitely consistency in it. It's under debate, obviously. Secular, scholars like to debate the consistency of it.
Which is why I bring it up, because I feel like you have this opposite side that's fighting against that. But I think we could rest assured, if you are reading this Bible and just taking it for what it's saying to you and just kind of open yourself up, that is consistent.
It's very consistent. And when you look at history and archaeology, listen, you just mentioned Jonah and the fish. One of the things that you look at with Jonah and the fish is we're not the first ones to connect that with Jesus. There were bone boxes, ossuaries, right at the time of Jesus's death, that when people already knew his divinity, they marked it with the fish, which again, in the beginning, Javi, you're like, oh, isn't that Jesus? They marked the ossuaries with a fish for Jesus because they recognized the fact that Jonah was in the whale for 3 days. Jesus was in the tomb for 3 days. So you have this connection 2,000 years ago where, we're talking about it today, but this is something that was consistent long ago from the moment it was happening. One of the reasons why we know these things happened is it was written about or shown about, or there was something about it right off the bat. This wasn't 300 years later at some meeting, some council where they gave Jesus divinity. No, this was right away. You see immediately this bone box with Jesus and asking him to save a loved one with the picture of a fish. And there is a consistency with the Bible, not only with the words and the translations, which, we already have plenty of records with that, with the Dead Sea Scrolls and other fragments we found to show how consistent it is. But there's a consistency within the Bible, in the text, that you can go really deep and look at some things that, like you said, numerology or letters or the meaning of words. I mean, when you look at Hebrew, every single letter, every single word has a meaning to it. When you really start to dig deep, you realize that the beautiful consistency is just throughout in a big way. I mean, man, we can spend, hours talking about all the different ways that we can.
Well, even, one of the things I was looking at the other day was like the consistency between Adam and Jesus.
Yes.
Adam doesn't commit the first sin. Eve does.
Yeah.
And he blames her. Jesus didn't commit the first sin, but he doesn't blame us. I mean, he blames himself. So he did what Adam should have done the first time, right? Had Adam maybe taken responsibility for his own action, maybe it would have been something. And David said that before, maybe the fact that they got kicked out was because they didn't repent. Adam didn't say, sorry, my bad. He said, she made me do it.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like the even consistencies as simple as that. First man, and they call, Adam, sorry.
Yeah, they called Jesus the first Adam.
They called Jesus the first Adam, or the something like that, right?
The second Adam.
The second Adam.
Sorry.
And, so to look at that, look at the consistency there. You're talking about two different like 2,000 years apart, and this consistent story that has the consistent beginning and a different ending.
Well, you were mentioning, Jason, wilderness. When you look at wilderness, almost every single time you look in the Bible, when you're in the wilderness, you fail.
Yeah.
I mean, we saw the Israelites in the Exodus, they failed in the wilderness. Yeah. But then you look at Jesus, who goes into the wilderness,
he didn't fail.
And did not fail.
Right.
So there's consistency even there. It's just,
well, and there's hundreds of those too. I mean, we could sit here and do this forever. Maybe we should, but I mean, this is where it gets so incredibly cool. And I don't want to return to the beginning again, but I think we should, and it's probably a good place to end, which is we've talked about the consistency of God, and we kind of alluded to the consistency of man, but I think it's really important that we remember that the Bible is full of one very consistent thing, especially the Old Testament.
Yeah.
It's the humans screw up over and over and over and over and over. Then Jesus came and revealed the sin to us and saved us from that sin.
Yeah.
And we continued to screw up. I mean, all of Paul's letters are him telling some church that they screwed up. And I think it's important that we just remember that we are those people. And this is not stories of people in the past. This is stories of people right now. Yeah. We are people. And we are people who continue to screw up. And we are people who need to continue to seek that consistent God. Keep pursuing that consistent goodness and righteousness and love that God has to offer, so that we can be at least a little bit more consistent in our goodness and our righteousness and our love.
Yeah, because he is consistently looking after us and following for us.
Well, we consistently use the word consistently the whole time.
No doubt about that.
We did. So yeah, I love us talking about the goodness of God and how consistent he is. But thank you for listening. Please follow us on all the socials at the Boundless Bible, and please subscribe. We want to hear from you guys, and share this to a friend if you think this is something that they could glean off of and maybe learn from. Till next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Later.